asking for advice on a situation where neither party is in the wrong. It's hard to put into words what's wrong with my marriage when there's nothing obviously wrong. My husband, 42M, and I, 34F, have been together for 10 years. He came from a middle-class white family. I came from a poor immigrant family. A lot of his childhood trauma was around not being allowed to show emotion and cry. His dad would tell him to be a man while his mom just told him to pray. My childhood trauma came from being physically, mentally, and sexually abused as well as just being neglected until I ran away from home. I have a much tougher mindset in that I'm able to stand up during hard times and prioritize important tasks. My younger sibling ended up living with me, and I had to care for them through high school and now college. No matter how I feel, I always make sure my sibling has everything they need. I've been in and out of mental hospitals and been in therapy and taking medication for well over 2 decades now. I'm well versed in mental health talk. My husband only recently started this journey because of the difficult times we've been having when I become severely depressed. I give him as much grace as possible when it comes to my depression because I know how hard it is to deal with someone who's suicidal. We've come a long way from the beginning. Originally, every time I got depressed, he would freak out and wonder what's wrong with our relationship and what he did wrong. This has been a constant issue in our marriage. He's gotten much better at seeing my depression as a mental illness, not an indication of the health of our relationship. But this past depressive episode was the worst I've faced in terms of support from him. Every time I get suicidal, I also feel extremely guilty. I don't want to kill myself, I just don't want to be alive anymore. When I get this depressed, I go mute. I have an extremely hard time making sounds with my mouth, and I resort to nods or shakes or hand motions to communicate. My husband knows this, somewhat, and is tolerant of it. But these last couple days he's been on edge from it. Even when I shake myself out of it, I have a hard time talking to him about my depression because of how defensive he gets. It's always "it's not my fault" kind of response from him. I'm depressed. But what did I even do? You won't even talk to me. How am I supposed to know? No matter how many times I reassure him, it always takes 20 to 30 minutes of us arguing until he finally calms down and sees that I'm not blaming him. This happens every time. It's exhausting. I'm always able to put a brave face on and baby him until he calms down. He says it's a knee-jerk reaction from his childhood, and how he's never had to deal with a depressed person because his family never talks about their emotions. I mean, nobody's family talks about emotions like that. It's not common to have a good experience with emotional and mental guidance from your parents. My parents weren't even home half the time, nevertheless there to talk about feelings with me. I gave him the benefit of the doubt for 10 years. But 10 years is a lot of experience living with a depressed person, right? At this point, I feel like this isn't an excuse I can take anymore. Every time I'm at the lowest point in my mental health, I have to take care of his emotions too. It's such a hassle. So this past depressive episode, I just didn't talk to him. I didn't know how to bring it up without upsetting him, so I didn't say anything. Of course this freaks him out. What can I do though? I was barely keeping myself going, trying to convince myself that life is worth living. And he's over here crying that I'm acting different, and I'm not telling him everything since he's being hyper-vigilant because he knows something is wrong. I cannot take this kind of stress anymore. I would rather deal with my suicidal thoughts by myself than be with him and take care of him at the same time. How do I deal with this? Am I in the wrong? I'm so tired of having this same discussion with him, telling him it's okay. I'm just depressed. It's not your fault. I've had depression before we met, etc., etc. I've had this talk maybe almost 100 times. Every time, it takes around 30 minutes of me pulling myself together, comforting him. Then eventually he comes around and says something like, "Oh, silly me. It's just my childhood trauma. I thought you were blaming me because why else would you bring up your depression to me?" I can't rely on him during my weakest point, and I have to baby him at the same time. Should I give up? Should we just split? I'm so tired. I'm so tired of raising him like he's my younger sibling.